This podcast is made possible by Planful.
Hi, this is Efren Rivera, the CFO of Paychex, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 834.
What I'm really looking at right now is our funnel from opportunity through fulfillment. And there's probably 24 KPIs that I'm looking at. So I'm looking at that funnel right now for efficiencies. I don't want to say inefficiencies. I'm looking for efficiencies because we need to get through that funnel faster. I need to know where there's breakdown in processes and if we can improve them.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with CFO Tracy Curley of iSpecimen. Like many of the women finance leaders with whom we've spoken, Tracy Curley's path to the CFO office is longer than our average guest. And indeed, her path has clearly been punctuated by more than her own professional priorities. One item I'll mention here that we didn't speak about on today's episode is that Tracy Curley was among the third class of women admitted to the U.S. Military Academy, and she would attend West Point in the late 1970s, early 80s. Now, West Point struggled to retain its women cadets during its early years, and Curley's class had a particularly high attrition rate, and she does leave, in fact, without graduating. That experience is now reduced to just sort of this afterthought item on her LinkedIn page, but I think it's one that speaks to who she was at that place and time. And I think, well, it goes without saying that besides the rigors of the military educational program, the first woman who entered West Point faced a good deal of systemic hazing and harassment, something most of us might never experience. So here's why I thought I'd include this item up front here, and that is sort of an observation that when it comes to women finance leaders, it's not always what appears on their resume, but what doesn't? Our discussion with CFO Tracy Curley begins after this. With so much change around us and your need for increasing agility, you have to equip your team to win, and you have to do it now. Join over 1,300 companies of all sizes using Planful to help plan and execute with greater confidence. Planful integrates your critical financial processes to serve the data you need, insights you demand, and the answers necessary to manage your business optimally. Planful lets you plan better, close faster, and report more accurately. And Planful's not just for finance and accounting. It's for the entire business to plan, collaborate, and drive increased financial performance. Take full control of how you administer and manage all of your financial processes and data, and put finance first collaboration at the heart of every decision. When finance is a team sport, you can be a champion. With Planful, you'll be a champion of finance. Get in the game by going to planful.com to learn more. Hello, we're speaking with Tracy Curley, CFO of iSpecimen. Tracy, welcome.
Thank you, Jack. Very nice to be here today.
Yeah, good to have you with us. Tracy, as always, we're going to begin by asking you to look back. And we're trying to have finance leaders identify for us those types of experiences that they think help prepare them for this role, the CFO role. What would those be for you?
Well, it's not just one experience, I would have to say, because in my background, I was a non-traditional student And so I had some business experience before I went back to school and finished my degrees. I got my undergraduate in business administration and then my master's of accounting at Kansas State University. But, I was in an office situation doing accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, and so forth before I went back to school. That helped me then when I finished school and I went into public accounting. And I started actually in California, in Monterey, California, with a local accounting firm. And then I moved to Kansas City, where I was with KPMG. I moved with KPMG to Honolulu and then to Boston. So I moved around. And the reason I moved around is I was married at the time to a gentleman who was in the military. And so I was the spouse following along, and KPMG afforded me the ability to do that. I had a broad experience, so I'm going to tell a little bit about my age, because when I started in public accounting, you did not specialize in anything. You worked, in any client that they had available, that you were available on the schedule. And so I got to work with manufacturing companies, banks, service providers, you name it. And then as I began being in public accounting a little bit longer, there began specialization, and I started specializing in, and you didn't specialize in just one. It was financial institutions and manufacturing, retail, and distribution. And so I got to do some pretty interesting things. When I was in Hawaii, I was on Hawaiian Airlines, which was going through bankruptcy. I also had an oil and gas company. I had a sugar plantation and cattle ranch on the island of Oahu, which was kind of cool. And then when I came to Boston, I then in public accounting, you were really focusing on a specialty, and it started in manufacturing, retail, and distribution. But at the time, life sciences and technology were starting to become a play. They didn't even have that specialty area. And so even though I was working on those clients, they were in manufacturing, retail, and distribution. So I got a lot of experience in there. I left public accounting and went into industry. So for those folks in Boston, they'll recognize these names. I'm not so sure anybody else outside of Boston, but I was at Cabot Corporation, Houghton Mifflin, Varian Semiconductor. And then I decided, I realized something personal about myself is that I like very challenging, diverse environments. And so at Houghton Mifflin and Varian Semiconductor, I really didn't have those opportunities. At Cabot, I had. And so I went back into public accounting. And I started with a super regional and then moved into, national firms. So then very focused on technology and life sciences. And towards the end of my public accounting experience with cannabis, I had a fair number of cannabis clients as well, because they were considered emerging growth companies. So I think all of that background really helped me in my experiences in industry as well as in public accounting. I was on the audit side, but a lot of the firms I was with allowed me to do consulting too, which I really loved. And so there were experiences I had, like at one of my experiences was on the consulting side, taking a company through a put together effective with the IPO. It was, going to be a $500 million IPO. They ended up pulling the plug the week before the IPO. But going through that experience to do that, and for other clients, helping them either on the audit side or on the consulting side become public, helped me to be successful when I was hired into iSpecimen to take them through their IPO. And we did that. I came in August. We went effective the following June, so less than a year.
So that's a great overview for us. Thank you. I did want to ask you something. You mentioned you began in KPMG, but you step out into sort of a number of corporate finance roles. But then you're sort of a partner for the 10 years previous to iSpecimen. You're a partner in a number of different accounting houses. And then I'm going back to that degree, that master's degree in accounting. I'm like, wow, for most of her career, she thought of herself as a top accountant, a partner. Something happened here. Something suddenly popped and she decided to, become the finance leader. Maybe it was eating at you for some time, but I'm curious. I mean, what and you did share that one experience of having gotten that company to the finish line there for its IPO and not being able to take it across the line really. How am I doing? Am I close? There's something. When did you start thinking of yourself as possibly a CFO is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, so COVID hit, and you start to, there is a tremendous shortage in the accounting field right now. You probably know that. And so, I have a lot of former colleagues that are still in public accounting, and they are working like you wouldn't believe. And I, for the last 10 years, was working like you wouldn't believe because I was in that leadership role, developing these these businesses for them. Either it was an SEC practice, or it was an emerging growth practice, or it was, a technology practice. I was responsible for growing that practice. So the top line, developing those resources, hiring them, developing them, so sort of eating what you kill. And what began to bother me more and more was, as a partner, the risk I was taking in the quality of the work that was being completed. You no longer have in accounting firms the pyramid structure that you used to have, where you would be able to delegate and you had enough resources. And there were times where I was actually doing some things that you would typically have a staff person to do because there was nobody else to do it. You roll up your sleeves, you get the job done because you got client deadlines and so forth. And during COVID, I really stepped back and said, is this really the way I want to live? And the answer was no. And so I actually took a pause. I am of an age where, I could have decided to retire or not. And I'm really, really fortunate, really blessed that I've got such great business connections in Boston because I was doing business development for so long here in Boston, that when I let people know that I was taking the summer off of 2020 and that I wasn't sure what I was going to do or if I was going to do anything more, I had a few folks reach out to me. And within a month of me taking my time off, I had several really, really great opportunities, and iSpecimen being one of them.
But you just pointed out something that I think is interesting. I think you have a pretty robust network. It makes it, and that's something that a partner in an accounting house you would expect over the time that you've done it. But can you share something about that? I mean, have you always been a great networker, or is this something you acquired over time?
I had no idea how good of a networker I was. I did not learn this until I was in my 40s. And so, one of the, for your viewers, one of the things Jack asks is, what recommendation would you make to your younger self? And my recommendation was network, even if you don't want to. And I had no idea that how important and critical that would be to my success over time. And I think if I had known that in my 20s, I'm not saying I would be wildly more successful, but I sure have a lot of fun networking. Let's put it.
I want to point out, I think Boston, having been on the sidelines in a number of geographies, observing CFOs sort of network, Boston is a very robust networking community for finance.
It is.
Maybe I just haven't observed others as closely, but no, it seems to me that Boston really does. So let's, like I said, I think we're going to touch on your career again during the mentoring round, but let's find out about iSpecimen. You talked about taking that company nearly public. Well, it was about a year ago that you took iSpecimen public. So quite a milestone for you. And but right now, kicking things off here, tell us about this company. What does iSpecimen do, and what are its offerings exactly?
Yeah, so we connect researchers to biospecimens so that they can accelerate medical discovery. And we do that with our proprietary marketplace platform. We're a marketplace company. So even though we are in the life science space, we are a technology company. And our so it's biospecimens. That's what we're providing to our customers is biospecimens, tissue, fluid, you name it, and the human specimens. We provide them so that we can accelerate discovery, research, in areas, and our customers are pharmaceuticals.
So is it little biotech companies as well as large pharma?
Yes, diagnostics, even the government, CDC, Department of Defense, anybody who's doing research. And we do it through our platform, which allows researchers to look at what we have to offer. And if they find them and it's a match, then they can order them. If they don't find it, we will help them find it. About 50% of our revenue is from what we call prospective specimens, which means that they don't exist. We go out to our supplier network, we look at their patients, we identify a patient that might be coming into the lab in the near future that meets their criteria. And so we facilitate, if you will, the creation. Well, it's not really the creation, but we facilitate the access to that patient specimen that meets the criteria the researcher needs for what they're doing. And with precision medicine, or what you call customized medicine now, research is getting much more specific in what they want to look at when they're researching. And our platform allows that. Our industry is very fragmented. We're the only company that has a platform like this. Everybody else does it manually, and it's small, mom and pop. So it's an industry that's ripe for roll-ups, if you will.
Let me give you a hypothetical here, because I think I get it, which is, so if I'm a biotech startup and I'm under the gun with my clinical trials, and suddenly we're missing a particular important specimen, if we're going to complete this on time, and for whatever reason, these trials always seem to be nail biters for so many companies out there, could they tap you as a resource? And is that a typical circumstance, or what would what's not typical about it if it isn't a good example?
So this is not a very automated process, what researchers need to do to find connections to suppliers. And we automate that, including the administrative activities associated with all of the privacy criteria. And also sometimes, hospitals or labs, they have different privacy levels than just what HIPAA says, because they want to offer that extra protection. And so a researcher having to go through all that administrative stuff, and it's not just the researcher, then it might be their legal team, or they might have an administrative team that gets involved. And before you know it, it's like this ball of yarn, and everybody is trying to deal over here on the researcher side with everybody over here on the supplier side. We sort of streamline that so that we're the marketplace in the middle, and there's straight lines into us and straight lines out and so forth. So we really streamline the process, not only in just getting your specimen, but all the administrative stuff associated with what you have to do in those processes to maintain privacy and HIPAA requirements and so forth.
So again, just turning back the clock 2 years, you step on board and you're 12 months away from an IPO. I don't know the history of the company, whether there was a group of private investors or was it venture backed, or how would you characterize it?
Private investors. We were never venture backed. We probably went public before we should have to access the markets, because we wanted to have additional funding for technology development of our marketplace. There's a lot more that we needed to really develop for our marketplace so that we could reach that critical mass and be able to accelerate our growth. In a marketplace, when you're when you're developing it, you've got the supplier side and you've got the customer side, and you build up the supplier side a little bit, and then you have to build up the customer side, because the suppliers will lose interest if they're not being utilized, and you only build up your customers a little bit because you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So it's like the seesaw that you have to go. And so we needed more funding to really ramp up our technology build out so that we can reach critical mass and be able to expand even faster and no longer have to rely upon the seesaw. And so we're pretty excited about technology-wise what we're building in-house for our marketplace platform right now.
Now, did you have to, as you stepped into the role and realizing you're going to be producing quarterly reports in the not too distant future, I mean, was the management system in place that allowed you to achieve that, or is there other priorities you had to come to bat?
Yeah, so when I came on board, they were having audited financial statements annually, but they were in accordance with AICPA guidance, and they were lucky if they were able to issue those audited financials by like August of the following year. It just wasn't a priority, and there was no monthly close, there was no quarterly close. There was more like an annual close, and so we really had to bring on all of those processes with regards to accounting closes and beef up things.
Now, it's still, you go public, it was still, the pandemic was still part of our lives last year. But can you tell us those circumstances? This had to be done a little differently, I would imagine. I don't know if you do a road show. What was the...
Yeah, so they were virtual road shows. And ThinkEquity was our banker. And they weren't even video road shows. They were all just conference call road shows. And, everybody had the deck in advance, and we would go through it and point them to whatever page to make sure. So it was extremely efficient, to be honest, because you were able to do, multiple road shows in a day. You weren't having to worry about travel, from West Coast to East Coast, then back to West Coast or even the Midwest. It was quite efficient. And even now our investor calls are all remote. We have done some in person, but people have gotten very used to doing virtual meetings now. We use the technology. Why not?
It's, again, it's characterized as an online marketplace, really. Now, is that, to me, that means digital visibility, like as if you have inventories of specimens that your customers can view online and understand better whether they could have access or where they might, it's almost like looking into their supply chains, I suppose. Is that what this can do?
That's exactly what this is. So I don't want to hold us out as the Amazon of specimens, but that is sort of our our high bar is, we want to be the Amazon of specimens. And part of the technology build out that we're working very hard on right now is to enhance the experience for the customer as well as the supplier. So both sides of the platform we're aggressively working on to enhance that, so that instead of it being 10 clicks to find out, do we have the specimen you want, within 2 or 3 clicks, you can find out whether we've got the specimen or not. And if we don't, because of what we're doing on the supplier side, if we don't have it right now, we can tell you when we think we're going to have it. And that's when we get there, that's going to be a really big game changer for us as a company. And we're really excited about that.
Was there anything in the government regulatory area that may have slowed the acceptance of this type of approach or model? And I guess what I'm getting at, when you talk about specimens, and we're all like, wow, that has to be really carefully done and observed. And I'm wondering, maybe there was a tweak in a law or something that allowed the opportunity to come forward. Anything like that, really?
Yeah, no, I mean, we follow what HIPAA does, so that if we need to tweak things, we definitely do. But you're absolutely right. For us, it's really on mostly the supplier side, because they're the ones that are really focused on HIPAA and privacy rules, because they're the ones dealing with the patients, and making sure that they understood exactly how we double blind the data to bring it over, so that we're not bringing over any patient information per se over to our researchers. Because not only do we sell specimens, but we also sell the data that goes with it. So that's pretty exciting for these researchers to have the data. So we have a lot of data that that we're collecting that we haven't monetized yet. But definitely in the early years, in trying to bring on suppliers so they understand what we're doing and how we're going to protect them. And you have to remember, this company started in 2008, 2009. What was the cloud? Nobody knew what the cloud was. And to tell them that we're going to put this up in the cloud, you more had to explain to them what the cloud was than like how we were going to double blind to, protect patient information and anything. In addition to and how secure is that cloud, right? So lot of convincing in those early years. Not so much now, but you still have to go through the process of explaining to them and their lawyers how the information gets protected.
In the technology world, in the SaaS world, it's all about recurring revenue, and I would imagine that's a metric that you might want to watch as well, in terms of a customer that comes back for additional business each quarter, each year, whatever it might be. Would that be true, or what are the metrics that you perhaps look at?
Yes, it is, and that's actually something we're looking at a little bit closer right now. Is how much of our revenue comes from reoccurring customers and how much is from new customers, and what can we do differently to improve our results with our reoccurring customers. We don't have a subscription model right now, primarily because, again, we're waiting for that next technology level enhancement that will allow us to begin charging for that, because that would be of tremendous value. And the company, very specifically in founding and determining what revenue streams they wanted to establish, decided not to initially go with a subscription model. It was more important to get those customers and those suppliers on board with this whole concept. But that is definitely a revenue stream in the next year or 2 years that we will be.
You'll be on that journey with so many other technology companies from 10 years ago that have been down that path. Again, the IPO, just from having gone through the experience, looking back, is there any moments in time you would give yourself a piece of advice, having done it already? Yeah.
There were some things that I looked at really hard when I came on board, and there were some things I did not. And I would recommend to any CFO coming on board a company that's about ready to go through this kind of process, or even not, to make sure you look at everything really hard.
Turn back the clock again. There were a lot of SPACs happening, Gwen, a lot of SPAC-driven IPOs. That was never in the mix here. That was never anything that was going to be pursued, I suppose.
No, we did a good old-fashioned IPO. It wasn't a reverse merger. It was a true IPO.
So then post-IPO, what we'd like to find out a little bit about are your lines of sight, and what are the numbers you're looking at to make sure the company's performing or advancing the way you'd like. What would be your top-of-mind metrics?
So what I'm really looking at right now is our funnel, from opportunity through fulfillment. And there's probably 24 KPIs that I'm looking at on a regular basis for that. Because if you think about it, we get an opportunity, and then there's a feasibility assessment with regards to that opportunity. And it's in the feasibility assessment, it's like, can we even provide that? Especially with 50% of our revenue being from perspective that doesn't even exist. So we have to do this feasibility assessment. And then once we do that, then we do a quote. And then if we win, we get the purchase order, and then we fulfill the purchase order, and we get to recognize the revenue, right? And so I'm looking at that funnel right now for efficiencies. I don't want to say inefficiencies. I'm looking for efficiencies because we need to get through that funnel faster. I need to know where there's breakdown in processes and if we can improve them. We just 2 weeks ago, since this is off the record, we had what we called the Summer Summit. And it was exactly to do that, to look at all of that and see what can we do better, where can we focus. When we think about biospecimens, we can parse them up in different ways, either tissue, blood, urine, whatever, or we can look at them as bank specimens, remnant specimens, prospective specimens. And you've heard me use the word prospective. That's 50% of our revenue. But we have bank specimens and we have remnant specimens. And when we look at how quickly do these different categories get through what I call the funnel, and when we look at the opportunities and then the underlying results in those categories, the success rate is different in each of those. And so then you look at the highly successful and you say, what is different about this? Is there anything we can do differently in this category or this category to be as successful as we are over here? And those are the things we're working on. Those are the things that we're looking at KPIs. And they're as simple as, number of opportunities, number of feasibility studies, number of purchase orders, percentage of feasibility studies to opportunities, percentage, and so forth, and in the different categories. And then not only that, but how much time did it take to do that feasibility study in these different categories? And what can we do internally so instead of letting the customer throw the spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks, maybe we should have more rigorous parameters on what we know we can and can't do, so that if we get a request and it's outside of that box, we have a conversation with that researcher to see if we can get their parameters within the box, that we know we have a higher success of saying yes in the feasibility study, giving the quote, getting the purchase order, and fulfilling. Those are the things that I'm really focused on right now. Now that the IPO is out of the way, now that I got my accounting close and all of that structure running really smoothly, because when I came on board, I had some folks I had to use, and I supplemented with a consulting firm. But over time, I've phased out those individuals. I phased out the consulting firm, and I brought on my own team. And so I'm very confident in my team in running things. And, we have weekly meetings, and in public, with a public company, you've got this sort of, it's like a wave. It's up and then it's down with regards to your ability to do things. When you're really busy up here, it's because you're doing your quarterly close or your year-end audit, right? You're focused on that. There's not much you can do because there's deadlines. You got to make those deadlines. But in that trough, that 45 to 50 days in between when you have to do that, there's a ton of stuff that from a finance organization we need to do. And we put together a project plan. And so in those time periods, I'm focused on, integration with systems, because there was no integration with systems here. Everything was siloed. And so we're very busy doing integrations and also process improvements, like with assisting operationally with the funnel and what can we do to help with that. We had a call today with site development, and there were some things that we were talking about, and our VP of site development said something. And I said, would it help if you had XYZ? And she was like, oh my God, yes, that would be great if we could see that, because we don't have visibility to that. And I said, well, we can help you with that. So it's having these conversations with them where we can help them be better in what they do to be more successful as a company as a whole. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I wish I'd done it sooner, to be honest, now. And
Excellent overview for us. Thank you. We always like to ask for a finance strategic moment, which is a moment of insight that you experienced sometime during the course of your career. It made you see the world a little differently, perhaps, or maybe it was an opportunity or a risk that you avoided. Don't know. But anything come to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
I don't know if it would be called a finance strategic moment, but it was definitely a moment in time for me that I thought I'm either going to be the hero or the zero right now. And it was when I was at Cabot Corporation. They had decided to spin off one of their divisions. And we were in this big meeting to kick this, this was going to be a 20% IPO with the intention of spinning this company off to the shareholders, which they did extremely successfully. And I was tasked with the person who was going to, be in charge of making sure all the financial information was ready for, and the S1 and everything was ready for this audit and so forth. That was my role. And the CEO at the time was a very exuberant gentleman, and he was pounding on the table, and he was saying, "And we're going to have this IPO done in like 3 months." And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not happening, because I knew the amount of work we needed to, and I knew from a timeline perspective, the SEC wasn't even moving that fast. And so my finance strategic moment was, well, either I get fired now or I get fired in 3 months when I can't deliver what he wants. And so I raised, and we had the bankers. I mean, we had Goldman Sachs in the room. We had all the lawyers. The CFO was in the room, executive management. I mean, their boardroom held 50 people, and there were 50 people in the room. I raised my hand, and he says, "What?" And I say, "I don't think we're going to be able to meet that timeline." And he just paused, because very rarely do people, because he was so reactionary, very rarely do people tell him the truth. They told him what he wanted to hear. And he was like, "Well, why not?" And so I backed into the whole process. And we hadn't even finished the audit. The auditors hadn't even finished the audit. It was PwC. They hadn't even started the audit, because we had financial information that we needed to bifurcate out to make this a standalone entity. So that alone was going to take like 2 months, and so forth. So I actually started from, well, the SEC now is saying it takes 45 days. And usually there's a few rounds of that. So, if you add that on, that's going to be at least 120 days. And then, we've got this. So it's going to be 6 to 9 months before we probably have this IPO executed. And he looked at me, and he looked around the room. Nobody cooperated. Nobody said anything. And he looked at me and said, "Well, I want it done as quickly as possible." And I said, "That we can do. We got it done in 9 months." But afterwards, I'm gathering my stuff, and I'm still shaking, because I'm like, "Oh God." And he comes up to me, and I'm like, "Oh, this is it. This is it." He said, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "I just want to thank you for telling the truth, because clearly nobody was willing to do so. And so just thank you for doing that." And I thought, well, I'm the hero today.
Hi, it's Jack. I hope you're enjoying our discussion with CFO Tracy Curley of iSpecimen. There's no question leaders do get isolated, surrounded by their bankers and upper management. They don't always hear someone tell it like it is. It's a question of timing, I suppose, too. A nice anecdote from Tracy Curley. We now return to our interview. We're going to enter now what we refer to as our mentoring round, where we ask you several quick questions intended to inspire and mentor future finance leaders. We want to, and we touched on this already, I suppose, but we're going to circle back to that first 30 days you stepped into this role. And curious about, again, as you shared with us, you enjoy being there now that you see all of what can be accomplished and the the type of approaches that you're allowed to take as a leader in a company. But wondering when you first arrived that first 30 days, if you could go back and just give yourself one piece of advice before the wild ride began to the IPO, and anything you'd tell yourself.
I go back to what I said earlier about make sure you look at everything with a hard eye. I looked at almost everything, and the few things that I thought, surely I don't have to look at, I ended up having to, a few months later, look at them. And fortunately, no harm, no foul. But there were a few things that if I only looked at it in the first 30 days, would have made for maybe less SEC comments in our comment letter.
Again, career related, going back in time, again, you filled a number of different partner roles along the way in the accounting houses. You could have done this earlier. You could have stepped into a CFO role earlier, I would imagine. And maybe there were certain recruiters who tried to entice you to take a look at a role seriously. Maybe you did. Would you have done things differently, maybe? Or are you of the school of thought that things happen for a reason?
I think things happen for a reason. I stayed in public accounting for so long because I did enjoy it, even though it is a grind. But I was building teams. I mean, you asked about mentoring earlier. I was mentoring and building teams and helping people develop their careers. My last accounting firm, because they really didn't have anybody internally with my expertise in the Boston office, and they expected me to do so much business development all by my lonesome. I actually began, while I was there, weekly lunch and learns on business development and did a whole curriculum, invited the whole office, but it was really to, as I was building my team, from me to, before I left, 16 individuals, how do you do business development so that they would know? Because if I had known as a staff person in public accounting how important business development was and how important networking was, I would have started doing that. But it's as if in public accounting, they don't expect you to realize that until you're a partner or you're about ready to become a partner. And then it's all of a sudden, it's like, so, well, like what kind of networking you do, what kind of boards are you on, what kind of business can you bring in? And so I wanted to make sure that people understood that there is a really important aspect to your success in public accounting that can be a lot of fun if you know how to do it. And so, I created all of these curriculums. It was a lunch and learn and everything. But I had several people, thank me when they made partner or when they made manager to say, the reason, especially when they made partner early or manager early, the reason I made it is because of you, because of what you taught me and mentored me. And so it's really hard when you know how important you are to people in that respect to sort of walk away like I ended up doing, because you are enjoying, you're making a difference. But I'm very happy where I am now. And my team, I sort of do the same thing. I took a big risk on a young gentleman straight out of school, didn't have any accounting. I really needed an accountant, but he didn't. He had a undergraduate in finance and a master's in finance. He had no experience whatsoever. Diamond in the rough. I took him on big risk for him too, to come on, and I made it very clear that if you can do these things right, then we'll hire somebody under you. So then you can start doing more of these finance things. Well, within 6 months, I was able to promote him over doing more finance planning and analysis stuff and hire somebody to replace this accounting stuff he really didn't want to do. And he also had a minor in information technology, which was really the reason I hired him, is for all the integration that we needed with all of our systems. And he's just a dynamo. So for this generation coming in, they really want to make a difference, and they want what they do to matter. And you need to respect that. And, when he comes to me and says, I don't want to do that anymore, we sat down and figured out how we could maneuver things around. He respected that I couldn't do that overnight, but that I respected his request and I was going to make sure that it happened. And so I think he's really happy. I'm really happy.
We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side of things. Tracy, we're looking for a personal habit or part of a daily routine that you're known for. This is something, a family member might point out to us, someone who knows you well. That's Tracy. That's how she does it. Anything come to mind when we ask for a personal habit or part of a daily routine that you have?
I don't know if I want to admit any of these personal habits. It's because it's not really a personal habit. It's a professional habit that you do, kind of on personal time. So I'm really blessed. I have 2 children. One of them decided to become a CPA, and now he's a partner at KPMG. And so where he, he's working crazy hours, but he loves it. He enjoys it. And, he was never pressured to do that. My other child is an elementary art teacher. And so I'm really blessed that they know how important my career was to me, when I was raising them. And I wouldn't necessarily call it a personal habit, but I do try to respond to things, emails, within 24 hours. I'm not always successful with that, but that does mean sometimes I've got, a laptop in bed at night or early in the morning trying to catch up on emails. And I don't necessarily think I want to admit that, but that is a personal habit that my family is aware of and knows about me.
Nice. Thank you for that. We are up to our final question where we're going to ask you to look forward the next 12 months. And what we'd like to know is your priorities as CFO of iSpecimen. What would those be over the next 12 months?
We have some exciting things that are going to be happening in the next 12 months, especially as we roll out these technology improvements, as we look at what they yield for us in potentially additional revenue streams. I talked to you about the funnel and some of those kinds of things to allow us to understand better maybe where we should be focusing with regards to the types of specimens that we're selling. So there's a lot of really great things going on. We're a long-term play as a public company because we're in our infancy, I think, from a technology perspective and what technology will ultimately be able to provide in this space. And so it's going to be exciting, not just for the next 12 months, but for the next 2 to 5 years for us as a company, what we'll be able to provide to this industry and in this space. It's going to be transformational.
CFO Tracy Curley, thank you for speaking to us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hello, listeners. Do us a favor. Be certain to subscribe to CFO Thought Leader on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or Google Play. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend.